Welcome to the Just Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Aiko Schaefer, Executive Director of Just Solutions. In today's episode, we will explore the impact of California State's new advanced pay pilot and discuss the implications for environmental justice. I'm joined today by Emi Wang, Director of Capacity Building at the Greenlining Institute. Welcome, Emi, to the Just Solutions podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Today, we're talking about the advanced pay pilot recently passed by California's governor. The resolution serves as a strategy to increase access to funding for lower-resourced organizations and communities, including grants from the Transformative Climate Communities program in California. This law serves as a great model for how states can better engage with community groups when sharing resources. So, Emi, hello again. Thanks for being on our show. It's good to connect with you. Here at Just Solutions, we are big fans of the Greenlining Institute. Can you share a little bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, great to be here. So the Greenlining Institute is a racial justice policy advocacy organization. We're headquartered in Oakland, California. Much of our work is focused on California, but with the number of federal kind of policymaking coming down, especially around climate, we're also expanding into some federal work. And then I lead our capacity building team. So this is our place-based team here at Greenlining. We work in place in a couple places in California, Stockton, Oakland, Eastern LA County, and San Diego, to really ground our policy directly in community-identified needs, priorities, and solutions, and also to work directly with communities to be able to direct immediate and tangible benefits so that they can achieve their own visions for self-determination.
You know, Greenlining has been part of really forwarding a lot of innovative policy solutions to the climate problem, and we're excited to be able to talk with you today about this advanced pay pilot and to learn a little bit more about how it works and help our listeners understand that so that perhaps they think about doing it in their own state. I think it's a really brilliant idea. So can you first talk a little bit about the problem that this pilot program will be addressing?
So I think as we've waded deeper into kind of policymaking and climate work, passing kind of pretty big progressive policy around, targeting benefits to disadvantaged communities, setting global kind of thresholds for California. As we've gotten deeper into that, there's really been this focus on administrative equity and like the nuts and bolts of how do you actually work as a nonprofit with the state to deliver on climate goals. So the advanced pay pilot is a response to a challenge that I feel like if you're not in the work, you might not even know is a challenge, which is that if you're a grants recipient of public funds, most public funds are not actually distributed in advance, right? You win a grant with the state or with the federal government, and you think you win the money, but in fact you don't. You have to first produce, usually it's about 90 days or actually, I'd have to double check that. You have to produce, billable hours in work and then submit for reimbursement from the state in order to be paid for your work that you receive the grant funding for, which is an insane way to do business. And it's the same way, especially as the state is trying to work with nonprofits and community-based organizations to forward the state's climate goals, carry out climate justice projects like tree planting, like solar, like energy efficiency, like active transit. Many of those organizations, many community-based organizations, and even some small local governments really just don't have the cash flow to be able to float a state grant on a reimbursement basis. So that's the challenge. The challenge has been there for a long, long time, but especially as the state of California has begun to invest more money in kind of community-facing programs, it's been the number one complaint of groups who are a recipient of grant funding.
I think that all of us here at Just Solutions, and I think our partner groups, obviously Greenlining, recognize the important role that community groups play in addressing climate change and really broadly social, racial justice issues by having the relationships, the understanding of what community needs are, being able to make important things happen in obviously important places for not only addressing social problems and economic challenges, but also to be able to have the expertise and wherewithal to do it. And the idea that they needed to do that work being unpaid and then billing to get paid for that work obviously makes sense that that's a necessary strain on them as organizations. As you all thought about addressing this problem, can you walk us through how this policy came to be, how you go about developing policy ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. This issue really started coming to the fore for us in our work on the Transformative Climate Communities program, which you mentioned at the outset. This is a program that Greenlining helped to create. We were a co-sponsor along with the California Environmental Justice Alliance. And the aim of the program is to deliver kind of really large catalytic investments directly in frontline communities in ways that are governed by those communities. And so the program is now in its 5th year of implementation. We've supported groups across the state, but especially in Stockton, to kind of go after and apply for the funds. And then we've been tracking the implementation of the program as it's been going. And the advance pay issue, again, was the number one when you are in the middle of implementing a state grant and you don't have the funds to do the work, to pay your staff, to hire, to buy supplies, to hire a contractor. It's a real impediment to actually seeing the work through. We started mostly just with kind of research and analysis. So we talked to 4 different communities that had received some of this Transformative Climate Communities funding. Each one of those communities independently identified the reimbursement nature of state grants as a key barrier in implementation. And honestly, like a key, just like a headache, right? Like if you can imagine being, doing your job, but not being able to be paid to do your job, not being able to buy the wheelbarrow you need to do for the community garden, like just a day-to-day was just a huge impediment to the work. So we started with research and we published equity analysis and equity evaluation of the Transformative Climate Communities program, where the advanced pay, the reimbursement nature of state grants was a key issue. And then we started socializing this issue and this challenge because I think we were unclear at the beginning on a couple things. One was we were unclear where really the root of the problem was because different folks were telling us different things. State agency administrators who we talked to, kind of varied across the spectrum. Some agencies, a small number of agencies, were actually already administering advance payment of grant funds. And we couldn't quite figure out where did they get the statutory authority to do that? It's great that you're doing that, but why just you and not all the other agencies? And then the vast majority of agencies that weren't doing advance payment of grant funds were pretty skittish, right? They would rely on kind of what they have been told about state contracting procedures and being told, mostly my sense is by lawyers, but also by the Department of Finance, that, expending funds on an advance payment would in some way violate kind of state contracting rules. So a lot of our work initially was just trying to figure out that mess and trying to figure out, without ourselves being in government, the trying to navigate through the bureaucracy and trying to navigate, okay, where is the root of this challenge? Concurrently, I think state agencies too have recognized that this is a real challenge, right? State agencies are the ones who are directly administering state funds, and they are hearing it from their constituents. I mean, you go to a grant application workshop, you go to, these public hearings that these state agencies put on, and the reimbursement nature of state grants is the number one thing that people who have gone through this know is a real challenge. So independently, I think state agencies were also starting to ID this as an issue. Last year, ultimately, we considered putting together a legislative proposal to permit advance payment of state funds, and ultimately decided not to do so, mostly because we had internal capacity constraints. We were still trying to figure out some of the internal challenges. But we were able to connect with folks over at the Strategic Growth Council, which is a state agency that we have been kind of in long-term relationship with. The Strategic Growth Council in California is a somewhat unique agency in that it's newer, it's smaller, and the explicit mandate of the Strategic Growth Council is to coordinate strategic activities across multiple California state agencies. So they're more nimble, they're more dynamic, and they have a kind of multi-sectoral view. And so through conversations, just kind of on the side and based on our pre-existing relationship with the agency, we were able to elevate the advance pay issue to the agency, who then kind of just took the issue and ran with it. They started socializing it internally within their leadership. They started convening interagency working groups to better understand the issue from different agencies' perspectives. They connected with the Department of Finance to better understand what were kind of DOF's, Department of Finance's, thoughts on the issue. And then ultimately during last year's the end of California's budget cycle, the governor introduced budget trailer language permitting advance payment in California across 6 different programs in kind of a pilot fashion to kind of test it out, test the waters, see if there were in fact administrative hurdles to administering advance pay, and to see what the benefits are. So that is kind of where we are right now. The advanced pay pilot is underway. And with the pilot in place, folks are now taking the issue and running with it even further. So this year in the California legislative session, there is a bill, AB 590, which takes that pilot and seeks to expand it across all agencies and all grant programs. It's just going through its first steps of the legislative process right now, but we're super excited to see a potential system scale shift to the reimbursement challenge for state grants.
This is great. So just so I understand it, so the pathway for you in solving this problem was to begin to work with a state agency, right? The Strategic Growth Council was a state agency. And then it was a sort of clarification in the governor's budget. So the original strategy was to do a legislative strategy, a bill that would set this in place. But this ostensibly had the same effect by it being part of the budget directive for the state to do this pilot. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So can you, when you look at the legislative kind of pathway or the policy design, can you help listeners understand, like, what is the sort of policy language? So the governor has the directive in the budget, but when you look at expanding it, what exactly are key policy elements that you feel like you needed in place for this to work in the way that you want it to work?
I mean, part of the reason why we didn't go the legislative route ourselves is because we were trying to still figure out kind of the internal considerations on the agency side, and not ourselves being an agency. We just got a lot of different information. And in fact, at the very beginning, when we kind of started exploring this issue, people told us, like, it's unconstitutional, like you would be violating the California Constitution if you allowed for advance payment of grant funds. Clearly that wasn't the case, right? Because some agencies were already allowed to do it. But it just seemed like when I heard that, a year ago, I was like, oh God, I don't think we can change the California Constitution to make this fix. So we had heard, it just seemed like a pretty hard hill to climb. And I imagine that's what folks in other places feel, right? The reimbursement nature state grants, to my knowledge, exists in other states. It certainly exists in a lot of federal grants. And I think if you talk to many administrators, they will say, no, this is just like policy. It's not possible to fix. Maybe it's unconstitutional. This is the way it is. Ultimately, what we learned in working with our kind of government partners was that it was possible to move. If you got all the relevant kind of actors in the room, Department of Finance, state agencies, the legal side, the administrators, there was actually some flexibility. And what we heard internally here in California was that Department of Finance was actually quite excited to issue some standardization around advance payment. That for them, it was actually confusing that some agencies were able to and some agencies weren't. So they were excited to take the opportunity to issue some standardization around advance payment. So I think for us, that was key. That kind of like education was key before just like charging forward with a policy play. First, being able to actually socialize the idea, kind of vet people's questions, better understand the constraints from different actors and different stakeholders. That was really key to making that work. And then the second piece was, the agencies themselves have been hearing it. So at that point, after 10 years of California climate investments and California policymaking, some of the agencies were also ready to be champions for advance payment because they knew, really innately that this was a real challenge to the work.
Absolutely. Well, and a challenge for communities, but also a challenge for those agencies to meet their objectives, right? And having those partnerships with community groups. I think it really makes a lot of sense. The argument is around continuity, around how government uses its money, pays for things, and seeing that lack of consistency and really pushing forward on that makes a lot of sense. And I think this idea of a pilot program to just ideally show that this is the way that we can get there makes a lot of sense too. So in the state of California, you have this pilot program. And as you look forward, just because a lot of our listeners obviously are in other states and many of them are thinking about this new federal funding that's coming down. In the case of California, and of course it depends on how you probably structure your policy, but what are the implications for federal money that's moving to states? Does that also get covered by the advanced pay program?
That's a great question. So currently, what we have in California is a pilot. It only applies to 6 specific programs in California. I don't think those 6 programs will be the recipients of federal funding through Justice 40. They're very specific kind of California programs. But if the legislation that's currently underway in California goes through to expand the advanced pay pilot to all programs and all grant agencies, then yes, funding that came down from the feds to the state would be able, I believe, to have advance payment of grant funds.
And so I assume that you all are tracking really closely how the pilot's going and tracking it towards your effort for broader advocacy around a much more broad-reaching policy. What are the metrics that you will be using to evaluate the effectiveness of the pilot program?
Yeah, well, the pilot program has evaluation built into the program. So I believe after 3 years after the program starts, the agency and Department of Finance is required to publish an evaluation looking at specifically each of those 6 agencies that come under the program and identifying what worked well and what didn't work well. And so the pilot just started in terms of implementation this past January. So we're still very early in terms of collecting those early metrics and pieces. I'm super excited. One of the programs that is covered under the program is that Transformative Climate Communities program. That is that program. Again, the grants are really, really big. There's a lot of partners involved. And so there is urgency to get those funds out so partners can start work. So for the next round of that program, Transformative Climate Communities, those groups will be able to take advantage of advance payment, which is super, super exciting.
That's great. And, you know, we have listeners all across the country. We have listeners in California, listeners in other places. So for the folks from California, what should they know about the pilot? What would you want to share with them about their ability to get connected, to be able to get advance pay, to participate in these different programs?
So for the pilot, there are 6 programs that are under the pilot. The ones that folks are probably most familiar with are Transformative Climate Communities, the Community Economic Resiliency Fund, Community Development Block Grants. Those are some of the big ones, the Community Resilience Center program. So those programs, if you are a grant recipient, you will be able to get up to 25% of advance payment. And then the other thing to really keep an eye out is this bill that's moving through the California legislature right now. It's AB 590. It's actually part of a larger 7-bill package. It's called the California Nonprofit Equity Initiative, really looking to reform contracting and grants to do exactly what we're talking about here. Make it easier for nonprofits to take on state grants and contracts and kind of remove some of the administrative barriers that stand in the way.
Sounds like a topic worth having you back on the show for, to learn about that policy and to be able to talk more about the broader work that needs to happen around this area. So for groups outside of California and other states who may be interested in replicating this policy approach, what advice would you give them?
I mean, the advice would be to not stop. Again, when I started kind of better getting acquainted with this issue, I was told this is just, it would be unconstitutional to advance payment of grant funds. It would not be possible to do this. And that's kind of what we thought for a long time until we started kind of exploring a little bit deeper and finding, those allies who would be able to take the issue farther. So that would be my advice. I have no doubt your own state agencies are going to tell you, it's not possible. But I think what we're showing is that it is in fact possible and in fact doable. We're looking at this at the federal level as well. As you know, Justice 40 there's going to be this fire hose of federal funding. And as far as I understand right now, all that federal money under Justice 40 is going to be dispersed on a reimbursement basis. Federal agencies are saying, that's just the policy, and it is going to take an advocacy effort for sure, but we have to make sure that those federal funds are actually able to get to groups. And my concern is that if the grants are doled out on a reimbursement basis, you are immediately cutting out smaller nonprofits, community-based organizations, and even smaller local governments who just can't float programming on a reimbursement basis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine for Black and Indigenous people of color organizations that tend to be smaller, nonprofits that tend to be smaller, it's even more of a hardship, which is why it's exciting that you're working on this broader equitable contracting strategy. It seems that it's a great chance to also work with nonprofits, across many issues that are in the same boat, and a chance for us to really rethink how we can more effectively work in partnership with community organizations that play such an important role on so many issues. So, Emi, always our last question for the show. We love to hear from our guests about what makes you happy about the environmental justice movement today, to just kind of lead us out on a high note.
Oh, that's a great question. I think what makes me happy is just seeing the strength of partnerships and the power that is building at the local level and at the community level. I'm super lucky to be able to work with a variety of community-based organizations in the places where Greenlining does local work. And even when like the macro headlines around climate change and pollution and, regulatory rollbacks, even when that is quite depressing, just being in space with local organizers, local power builders, local advocates, it has to be what keeps the work going.
Well, I know that we have really appreciated our partnership with Greenlining Institute and so happy that, Emi, you are able to be with us today. Thanks to our listeners for joining us on the Just Solutions podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Tayler Ward, and our recording engineer and editor, Angel Bautista. If you'd like to know more about our work at Just Solutions, visit our website at justsolutionscollective.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for the latest updates. Together, we are driving community-created and equity-centered solutions to the climate crisis. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.